everyone, welcome to the C Exchange. CS stands not only for customer success, but also for content secrets. This podcast explores the content secrets of customer success leaders.
We put a spotlight on content innovation and bring you an inside look at the most exciting moves made by customer success leaders.
We are your co-hosts. I'm Dina.
And I'm Guy. And on today's episode, we're happy to host Jean Yang about creating an effective content for your target persona and your target audience. Jean is a global customer success leader and a principal consultant, one of the top influencers in the customer success community globally, and also a distinguished content creator. I know Jean for a few years already and very much enjoy the content she creates and for both customer success leaders and customer success professionals.
Let's get started. Hi, Dan. To start with, can you tell us about your background and experience as a customer success leader?
Sure. I was just talking to somebody yesterday explaining that I technically have never had the defined role of customer success manager. Back when I was an individual contributor, we didn't know to call it that. But when I look back on my experience, it was always that. I was always focused on the post-sales motion. I was always looking to help the customer achieve their objectives, their business objectives. I was looking at what was strategically taking place in the marketplace and how that intersection between the customer and our company, where that intersection was and how we could grow both what our customers were doing and what we could be doing in the marketplace. So I've always been very strategically focused in that sense. Started my career in tech by coming in as a project manager, and then I did a marketing role for a couple of years, which I very much appreciate marketing, but I don't like to do marketing myself. I then moved over into the individual contributor role where I was promoted over time to vice president and stayed with that company for 8 years. After that, I worked with another startup. It was more of a professional services role. It was doing I led project managers and account managers. And that I would say they had aspired to be SaaS, but because they customized for each customer so much, they really ended up being a cloud-based technology. Learned some good lessons there. And then since then, I've really been either a solopreneur consultant or working with the Success League, where we just focus on just the post-sales motion with customer success and do a variety of things there. We have certification programs, coaching, we do consulting, workshops, a variety of different things. And, I love it. I geek out on it all the time. It's something I love. I'm just very passionate about, and I can talk about it for hours on end, and pretty much that's what I do all day long. So couldn't be happier in my role.
Sounds like an amazing journey you had.
Bit of everything.
Yeah. So on our podcast, we usually talk about how to use content to overcome challenges, but it's important to keep in mind who we are making the content for, not just what problems we're trying to solve. So that's why we want to talk today about persona-focused content. So why is it important to create content tailored to your target persona?
Well, and this actually goes to one of the roles that I didn't mention was a product manager, where I had a little bit of a product manager hat on as well at the startup where I went from individual contributor up to VP, and that's where you get into thinking about jobs to be done. If you're thinking about your customer, if you're really customer centric, and there's a one way of doing it as a product manager, and I think it lends itself very well to any customer centric approach is thinking about what the job that the customer wants to do. And if you're thinking about your customer and you can put yourself in your shoes, if you imagine it, and put their hat on, whatever hats they may be wearing in their organization, think about what do they need to do with your product. And when you're doing that, whether it's customer education or onboarding, or when you're a strategic advisor with them, or when you're working from support, any of the CS post sales motion roles, like that's when you can really help your customers the best and the most easiest, the easiest in terms of helping them to reach their objectives most quickly and without filling their head with extraneous stuff that doesn't matter, that doesn't pertain to them. When you think about when you're trying to tell them about your latest feature, do they care? Do they care about that feature? How are they going to use it? That's what they care about. If there's a new functionality for them that's going to help them achieve their business outcome, and you know that and you can connect that, that's when they care. That's when they adopt. That's when they do what you're trying to help them do. So that's why I
Right,
think it's important to think about personas.
right. And how do personas differ in terms of their needs, preferences, and pain points?
Well, I mean, that's part of how you sort of kick the tires on it, right? Is ask those questions for your particular customer base and product. You need to think about, um, first of all, what sort of segments are you working with? What sort of personas are within those segments? It could be if you have a fintech product, maybe you're working with, a finance team, and maybe the CFO needs something different than the person who's in accounting and that sort of thing. Maybe they need to, their jobs to be done is slightly different. When you think about your stakeholder who made the purchase decision versus maybe your champion who's the administrator versus some end users, they all have different jobs to be done. They care about your product in a different way. They have different objectives. And so when you think about that, you can even if you're doing a scaled CS approach, if you think about those personas and how they're working, within, with your product. And if you ask those questions, what do they care about? What are they trying to achieve? What is the cadence that I need to communicate with them in order to get them the information that they need, for whatever step you want them to do? For, an executive stakeholder, you want them to, you want them to purchase again. So what do you need to do for that? You think about an administrator, you want them to do various things on certain cadence. End users have a different cadence, have different things that they're doing. If everyone within your organization is thinking about that, it doesn't have to just be a one-to-one. It can also be a one-to-many approach where they feel personalized because you've thought about that.
Nice. And Jan, what are some common mistakes people make when they try to create content for different personas?
I think often we look at our own belly buttons instead of looking out to the customer. That's the biggest mistake, right?
So
We think about
make,
what we want from them.
making assumptions about what they need instead of kind of figuring out or understanding what they
Ask,
or ask them what they need in reality.
yeah, I mean, we're so afraid of actually talking to our customers, and yet, and asking them, real questions. Even when it comes to when we need to renew the agreement, we say, we're afraid of asking them, like, if you had the opportunity to renew today, would you? Like, ask that question so you know what you're working with. In the same case, if you're onboarding, start to gather information from your customers. If you don't know your personas very well, then start talking to them and ask them, what do they need? What are their questions? What are their fears? And then you can start to work with that. It's really just working through that so that you can start to get a guesstimate together and then iterate. We're all in tech, we're working in agile methodologies. Iteration is not just okay, it's expected, and it's important to do, because also your ideal customer profiles and the different personas within your segments, they can change over time. You need to know that. we had major changes happening with the economy, in every country and globally. So people, what they were concerned about and what their goals were a year ago versus now is it could be very different. Ask, just ask.
Yeah, it's a good approach and a good tip for everyone. Another question: what are some of the ways to measure the effectiveness of personalized content? What would your recommendations will be?
Well, I think that you need to understand at any stage what your objective is. If you know that during onboarding they need to do these following steps within a certain period of time in order to be successful, to maintain that momentum, then you want to start measuring how long that's taking. Now, maybe you don't know that yet. Maybe you're still just building things up. So then start to look at how long any of those steps took for some of your successful customers versus your less than successful customers. And if you can't build that, then just start tracking now and see. Same with adoption. How many people and who needs to adopt first, and what do they need to do, to take a look at what those steps are. That's why, you first need to take a look at the customer base segmentation. Then for that customer segment, what is that customer journey? What are those moments within each phase that they need to be achieving? And then you can start to look at, have they taken care of those things in that period of time or not? It doesn't have to all be a one-on-one experience where you're working with the person directly. There can be automated touch points, reminders and emails and in-app, things, that are being suggested if they're in your app. Um, all of those things can be a part of it that can help lead them to it. That's where a marketing drip campaign, even though I said I hated marketing, I do appreciate it. But when you think about it compared to a marketing drip campaign, you're doing these sort of drip reminders, right? In the same way, you can apply that to you onboarding, to adoption, but you need to measure those points in time and those activities. So and understand which persona should be doing that by which period, and then you can start to say, hey, you didn't get this done within the week that we recommend, or that you said you were going to do it. Depends on who's doing that commitment. Set those things up though based upon your customer base, based on your product and what makes sense.
Let's switch to another aspect, the neuroscience-based content.
Hmm.
Does understanding the neuroscience of content consumption help create effective content?
Well, now you're touching on one of my favorite topics because I love thinking about neuroscience and how it impacts business, and that's largely due to Dr. Britt Andriata. And I will spell out her name because it's important. Brittandreatta. All right. And if you look at her website, she has three different books, and I admit myself, I'm just in her second one. But whether she's talking about change management or learning or how you work collaboratively, it's so important to understand how the neural pathways are built in your brain and why it is so hard to do new things, right? Like when you're driving to the grocery store, let's say, or walking a certain route home, from a metro station or something like that, you're on automatic. You forget, that you even went through these steps because you have this neural pathway that it does it automatically, compared to if you take a different route, or if you move to a new neighborhood and now you have to find a new grocery store or whatever it might be. Those things are much harder. You have to think. Here in Los Angeles, where we have Trader Joe's, they move all of the food around every couple of weeks. It's ridiculous. You try to find things and you can't. But actually, it's actually very good for the brain because you're building new neural pathways. That said, it's super important that when you're onboarding a customer or you're helping them adopt a new product, they have to build a new neural pathway. And if they're coming from using another product, then they expect your product to work the way the old product worked. So you need to know that, because you need to know what you're trying to overcome, what hurdle you're trying to help them overcome, right? Versus if someone didn't come from using technology at all, right? And so you think about these things like, where are they, what is their starting point? And how do you help them identify the pain of not changing so that they're willing to go through that effort to change? It takes 40 or 50 times to build just the beginning of a neural pathway, right? 40 or 50 times, and hundreds of times before you do it without even thinking. How many times is your customer using your product? Are they going to use it once weekly? Are they using it once a day? Are they using it once an hour? That tells you how much time it's going to take before they start to feel comfortable with it.
So how can you help your customers with that? How can you structure content for maximum impact?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, you want to think about when you're training them, don't just give them information. Don't just put it in their face like that, right? Like, what you want to do is help them try it. If while you're training them, they get to try it 3 or 4 times, they're talking about it, they actually hands on the keyboards, try to do it, things like that. That's going to help build those neural pathways before they've even, stopped working with you. And then if you structure it in such a way that they have more opportunities to use it and to try it, and maybe, with some guidance in some way, maybe it's the guidance within your app, maybe there's a video, maybe they're never going to use your product very regularly. If that's the case, do you make it easy for them to find the instructions or to have a guide that will help them use it easily and feel comfortable using it? Because they don't use it regularly, they're never going to use it regularly. Know that about your customer, and know that about your tool. And that's why it's so important. Think about the shoes you put on. Think about the hats that they're wearing. Literally think about that physically, so you can think about that customer perspective and their job to be done.
And how can we use things like video, visual storytelling, things like that to engage the brain to make the content easier to remember?
Well, that's critical, right? For it is there. Well, and it's important to understand which persona you're working with, right? Oftentimes, if you are working, say, like with someone who's in IT, the visuals that they want might be, written, content, and they're willing to go with very long documentation, right? Because they're used to that, they feel comfortable with that. But most of us are, TikTok users and very short content. We're looking at stuff on LinkedIn. There's however many 1,500 characters or something, right? So if you think about that, think about your persona, right? Think about how much patience they have, but also how much bandwidth before they're going to get overloaded. Ultimately, though, it's been kind of shown that learning is better in small chunks, with then reinforcing with someone to do it. So that you want to have short episodes of information, and then go and try and do it. And then short episodes, and then go and try and do it. So if you have visual, if you have, something that's auditory, if you have something that's video versus the visual of what you're looking at on the screen, what you're working with, try and provide as many different options so that the person who is working through this, because it is a person in the end, we're working with people, then that they have the means to do it most easily.
One more question, Jean, and this is one of my favorite topics, customer success strategy. And I'm interested to hear your opinion, whether content creation is actually a part of customer success strategy, or should we implement content and create content in response to specific challenges that the customer success team faces?
That's interesting. When you think about it, like, you do want to have content as part of your overall strategy, right? And content is everything, right? Content is your email. Content is the guide in your app. Content is what videos or or short, write-ups, that you might have. Build initially because certain, there's going to be certain things in your customer journey, so you
Yeah.
anticipate certain things. But then also say, like, when you're in support or even onboarding or adoption, where you start to learn that over time, oh, I'm getting similar questions. And so when I have regular questions on this topic, I want to now provide this. But then sometimes you're working with someone and they can't get it unless you just, create something on the fly for them, right? So it might be customized in that case, and it might not be reusable exactly. It might only be reusable for that particular company, right? Where they can share it with others at that company, but it doesn't work across other companies for other examples. But I think it's still helpful to have tools that make it easy for you to create those, right? Because if
Yeah.
you do have them, then it's not a big production. You don't have to go to someone else and say, can you build this? Because in this short conversation, I want to be able to show something just to my customer. Like, no, you want to be able to use whatever tools you have at the tips of your
Yeah.
fingers, right? In more in that sense. But no, I do think that you want to have it as part of a planned approach as well, something that can be reused, because you don't want to have to create the same video over and over and over, as
Yeah.
well. So
Agreed.
that's
Yeah,
why my answer.
I did. It's definitely aligned with what my view is, that at least you have to think about it. You not have necessarily have to plan it or have all the tools and the technology in place from the get-go, but at least have
Yeah.
the right mindset and conceptually understand that this is going to be a major part of your journey and your customer journey at a later stage.
Well, and when you think about it, you don't start day one with everything in place,
Exactly.
right? Every CS program is built up over time. Or let's say now you've started a customer education program because you're getting more mature. Even that starts with something on day one and gets built up over time. Nothing
Correct.
happens just, with a snap of a finger. And then also it changes over time, and you want to modify your approach. I know too, the challenge can be to then maintain all of that, content, and to update it as your product changes. So, certainly over time you might need somebody who is just focused on doing that as you mature as a company and as a product.
Good.
So
Thanks.
before we wrap up, do you have any last tip for creating effective content that resonates with your target persona?
Well, I would say that there's actually as much as I don't like working in marketing myself, there's a lot we can learn from marketing, right? When you think about things like, the hook, and generating that interest in the content, or just helping people understand, sort of the taxonomy, things you can learn from learning, generally, sort of the taxonomy of, like, well, where can I find, what I'm looking for, making it easy on your customer. But mostly it's that jobs to be done approach, where you need to think about, from your customer's perspective, what is their job to be done? What do they need to do? And if you're doing that both in how you're setting up your content, how you structure it, then you can set it up where it's actually something that they will use. And then measure it, track it. Take a look at if someone's going to stick with your whole video or not. And why is that? If they don't stay the whole time for the whole video, is that because they already got the information they needed at, minute 3 versus minute 6? Maybe you don't need 6-minute video. Maybe it should be 3 minutes. Maybe it should be 2 minutes. Maybe you should think about, how you can get that information to someone more quickly, and or break it up into smaller chunks so that most people can go to the middle section of that 6 minutes, even if it's all needed, right? And break it up into 2-minute sections so people can get what they need. I believe also very firmly in iteration. and trying things out and then seeing what can be most successful.
I want to thank you, Jan, for joining us today and sharing your experience. It was very insightful, and we enjoyed the conversation very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
So, Jen mentioned jobs to be done. She talked a lot about jobs to be done and how we need to understand our customers, their needs, their pain, and not just looking on our belly button, but really understand our customers.
Yeah, I like to, John was kind of speaking from a holistic approach about, the personas, and we can very easily conclude it or derive the conclusions for the customer management side of things. And, as you're a small company, maybe you have one type of audience, and still you need to ask what they need, or ask yourself what they need to be able to achieve what you expect them to achieve. And later on, when you grow and you are becoming a bigger customer success organization with a more mature product, most likely you have different types of customer segments, a different type of users, and you cannot only assume that that what one type of content will match all their needs. And I think what we can take from Jean's comments is that we shouldn't look only on our belly, but we should ask questions. Whatever we should ask ourselves, we should ask our product team internally, and obviously ask customers, assuming we have some baseline, and then we are able to iterate and change accordingly.
Right. She also talked about the neuroscience approach and how the brain needs to repeat something like 40 to 50 times before we actually understand and remember.
So yeah, that was very insightful for me. I didn't read the books that Jean mentioned in the episode, but that's definitely one thing to remember when we are making assumptions about how users will follow a certain flow in our software and our solution. We also talk about change. So if they are got used to one way of doing things, using a different software or not using anything, she also mentioned the fact that how technology savvy they are versus non-technology. So you have to take that into consideration. And sometimes it takes 40, 50 times. Maybe for other people who don't have any experience, it will take more. So I think this is something to remember in our minds when we are designing content and we're thinking that it's very easy to do something with customers, when maybe actually, even if it's simple, it will take time, especially when we're also talking about how frequent they use the product. If they use it daily, maybe they will build this neuropath very quickly. Maybe if they use it once a week or once a month, it will take much more. And then Jean mentioned other strategies to address it.
Right. And the last point was the strategic aspect of content and what's the place of content in the entire strategic view.
Yeah, and I deliberately asked the question because Jean wrote a few articles about customer success strategy, and we can always claim that eventually training customers, knowledge management, eventually is related to creating content, or content is a byproduct. And I think that her approach is, what I would expect from any CS leader. You have to remember that this is part of what you need to do as a CS team. You want to train the customers, you want to help them, you want to drive certain change or drive certain behavior. But you cannot plan everything from scratch. Maybe you don't have the right tools in the beginning. Maybe as we said, environment change, challenges change, users change. As long as you have it in place and you know that you have this strategy in place, you will probably be able to figure out the right, more tactical solution to business challenges and technical challenges later on.
Thanks, guys, and
Thank
thank
you.
you all for being with us today. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Please share it with your colleagues and stay tuned for our next episode. See you next time.
See you. Thank you, Dina. Bye bye.
Bye.